I am Let Muvasitan. And this book of Leviathan gets freaky, even by this world's standards. Just thought I'd warn you in advance. Previously on Leviathan. While Virgilius, the Red Gaze, and Garnet, a rookie fixer, was being escorted by a ring thug, Rikoko and Nancio were doing their parts, posing as couriers transporting moonlight stones to the gallery. Nancio was taking it more seriously than Rikoko. Denver was delivering some tech to a ring docent that couldn't stop crying. And he looked pretty out of it during this deal. All this was going on while their handler, the ponytailed female fixer, was monitoring their positions and keeping track of their situations. Sorry, yes. I got the gender wrong there. Again, sorry about that. We pick up where we left off, with Denver and that docent that couldn't stop crying out of his left eye with a tear jewel below that eye. As the ponytailed female fixer was breathing in her dose of nicotine and tar from her death stick. Clearly a slow death from that is the least of her worries. She basically told Denver to sample the goods to show that they're genuine, to maintain the cover. He asked the docent if he was okay with that. As the ring thugs around them looked like they might drop dead while waiting for him. The docent told him not to worry about that. He wasn't too concerned, seeing that the drier the eyes become, the greater the joy of seeing will be. During this exchange between Denver and the docent, his handler asked if they had any cleaners left. One fixer told her that there was some left in stock. While Denver was taking off his sunglasses, his handler told him to be sure that he gets his brain cleaned after what he was about to do. Now, in this context, cleaners mean some device or drug that wipes out memory. Well, past a certain point. For example, if they wanted to wipe out 3 hours of memory, they can set it to do just that. Think the neuralizer from the Men in Black movies, but also the source material. But it's not as good. Well, that's what was implied, anyway. It was like the cleaners were used on that selfish hole, the Black Silence, when he was much less experienced, and also a younger Salvador, who was originally a Zwei fixer, but at some point after that switched to being a Lou Association affiliate. They needed it after they learned what was hidden in the L-Corp that was there before Ian, Benjamin, and Carmen took over District 12. Please see also The Distortion Detective to learn some background as to what started the Smoke War. that the Black Silence and Salvador were involved in. I've covered that part in its own lore series. Yes, Kalinas are apparently standard procedure when it comes to seeing things that shouldn't be widely known about the wings. Although, as the Black Silence demonstrated, the wiping of memory isn't always complete. There's known to be some traces that remain, enough to leave some lasting effects. Back to Denver, he cautiously picked up the cylinder that he delivered to the ring and placed it onto his left eye as the docent closed her eyes in eager anticipation. He then activated it with a press of a button. This then sent his mind through a kaleidoscope of reflections, seeing his own appearance in most of the triangular panels. This was almost too much for him to handle as he sweated. He flinched, and then he dropped the prism device. His hand shaked, and he found himself distorting in an unstable way as his face melted. Minuscule fingers were appearing around his mouth and his left eye. Larger fingers were growing on the side of his head, which was opening up in a grotesque way. One that would make any psychiatrist say, "Who said to take it literally when I said I wanted to open you up?" Parts seem to go inside out as we see the inside of his left ear. He then fell off his stool and found himself in a sandy desert, sweating as if he was really there, yet appeared largely back to normal, disoriented and unsure of where he was. Denver, you're currently in the Marijuana Kingdom, and you're in a knockoff of a long-running game series where you play as a stereotype being cruel to mutant tortoises. Seriously. He then sees the prism again, but more ordered, and he saw himself in each. But each version of him was different. Likely this is a part of the prototype identities mechanic, as one version of him that we could see was holding a lantern and he was somewhere outside, which is either in a rare green part of the city or a less garbage-laden part of the outskirts. Well, he certainly did. Well, he doesn't have a mask, so he's clearly not part of the Ujat, as in one of Lady Dias's troops. Then we saw a bird's skull and its neck. Or more specifically, its spine, as there was no meat on those bones. He caught the vomit in his hands, which failed to be contained. He then saw the bones break down, and then he noticed that he was in a large black puddle, and then there was something that came out of it. It was a version of him, but he was dressed differently, and had a pass attached to his coat that had it had an X on it, in a distinct style. Well, it's certainly not the Zwei Association style coats. So it's possible that this is a version of Denver that was recruited by X-Corp. Then Denver snapped back to reality, feeling nauseous and shaken by the experience. the docent asked how he liked such ecstasy. Denver considered it one hell of a time, as his left eye was constantly crying after that. Continuously. This pleased the docent, who had both eyes crying. He then came closer to him, and his eye was right up to Denver's, telling him that his eye looks good on him. Well, homosexuality isn't a taboo in that society. There have been a few references to that in both Lobotomy Corporation and more so in Library of Rowena. How this will affect Denver, it's hard to tell. But that can wait as the story shifts to a different perspective. But he definitely saw an alternate of himself, and the technology hasn't been perfected at this point in time. But eventually, it will be. Well, at least for temporary gains in battle. What happened to Virgilius and Garnet? Well, they were climbing up the stairs with the ring thug as an escort. Garnet didn't know what was going on, but Virgilius did. Apparently, it was reset season, as they saw rows of people next to artworks on the floor. Each individual had their artwork in front of them, as others were observing this. Ring thugs were watching some, while others were chasing the prospective artists with lethal weapons, with a few on the floor dying in their own blood. One of the ring thugs was in the process of telling one of the artists that they had a 3-1, and so they were out. They had already flunked twice before. They won't be under their aegis with their low grades. So this ring thug used their rapier, still stained with blood, to kill that failed art student. I heard that the world of art is brutal, but you don't usually get yourself killed in that way because of it. It's more underlines of substance abuse and unstable relationships. This failed artist's blood ruined their work, which had been considered worthless even before that artist was killed. Okay, can you see what I just described being a TV show, even in that world, where the failures themselves when heavily criticized, knowing that their blood spilled on the floor could be next in order to make an artwork that's only slightly better than what they came up with? Okay, anyone seeing that art critics aren't necessary in the city, as any artists that are substandard are dealt with by the ring, and I recall Voltaire saying that if you want to know who rules over you, find out who you're not allowed to criticize. And criticizing the kind of art that the ring likes, you're deader than democracy in that grimdark world. According to Virgilius, the exam site at that time had a rather large audience. And according to that ring thug, many of the examinees were desperate backstreet residents. where it involved their art being something worth putting their lives on the line, with them being killed when they reach strike 3, as it was just demonstrated just then. He then invited them to enter the 3rd floor VIP lounge. It had a lavishly decorated chamber. Then behind them were 3 others. Another thug spoke of some things to note during the auction, which were then this thug was interrupted by this spectacled man who told this thug that there was no need, as he was familiar with the rules, seeing it as a simple game to pour in more money than the other players. He and his escorts, who were identical twin sisters with glasses, one was dressed in a trench coat, tie and fedora, and the other was dressed like she was from the 1930s. At the latest. Although it could be in a 1920s style. Regardless, both this man and Virgilius were clearly familiar with each other. That's where this story is done. For now, at least. There are questions. Who is this competitor of Virgilius? What is their backstory? According to one of the comments at the bottom of the source material, this man was in the teaser of the game Limbus Company. Now, if that was the case, was this from a time in between this and the start of Limbus Company, or was it during Limbus Company? If it's the latter, then Virgilius isn't the only one who has plot armor in this. As for Denver, let's hope the cleaners used on him in time, as it's possible that he might distort if allowed to retain this knowledge for too long. As for what Nuncial and Rococo are doing during this, I'm sure that they're doing their own thing and they'll be playing their parts when they're needed. We just need to wait for the next part of this story to continue. I can wait. There is clearly a plan coming together. It's just not clear to us what that plan is. But it involves 3 distinct groups. Well, until next time. Hail the rabbit!